I knew we were screwed the moment Chase Halpern compared SOC 2 compliance to checking a vibes box. He said it with a straight face, too, like regulatory oversight was just some mood board suggestion we could ignore if the client was cool enough. I was halfway through my second black coffee of the day, watching this walking LinkedIn post try to brainstorm synergies with a whiteboard marker that smelled like desperation and Axe body spray. He looked like a guy who microwaves salmon in the office kitchen and brags about intermittent fasting right after. My name's Brenda, and for the last 8 years, I've been the invisible firewall between Titanova systems and a dozen federal investigations. Compliance operations lead, which is a fancy way of saying I spend my days making sure people like Chase don't get us sued into oblivion. I don't wear a badge. I don't lead town halls. I don't pitch at investor summits, but I know where the documents are buried. I know who backdated the API logs in 2019, and I know how to make the audit alerts sing like church bells when someone does something stupid. Spoiler alert, someone always does something stupid. My job is part digital janitor, part babysitter, part-time bomb diffuser. You won't see me in the spotlight. That's by design. I learned early that the safest place in a company like Titanova is the shadows, right between legal and IT, where no one notices you unless something breaks. And I was fine with that. I didn't need the credit. I just needed the system to hold. But Chase needed all the credit and then some. They brought him in from some failed AI startup in Austin, and within 2 weeks he was calling himself the head of vision. Not product strategy, mind you, vision. Like he was Moses coming down from the cloud with new commandments carved in acrylic. He didn't just ignore policy, he didn't even pretend to learn it. His very first all hands, he told the engineering team we'd move fast, break rules, and apologize later. I remember writing that down in my logbook like a crime scene detective recording motive. And right about here, since you've made it this far, let me ask you for a little favor. See, about 90% of folks who listen to these stories don't hit subscribe or drop a like. And I get it, maybe you're mid-laundry or driving through rush hour. But it genuinely motivates the team and helps us keep bringing these corporate soap operas to your ears. So if you like tales of boardroom betrayal, digital sabotage, or just watching smug men get hoisted by their own PowerPoint, click that button. It means the world to us. Back to Chase. The first time we clashed, it was over a pretty straightforward thing, internal test data. He wanted the product team to use real user profiles in a demo for some VC clown he was trying to impress. I said, that violates policy 12.4c. He blinked like I'd just spoken Esperanto. Then, I kid you not, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "We're here to win clients, not write manuals." That was the moment I knew. Not suspected, not assumed, knew that this man would eventually try to light the whole company on fire for a 6-slide pitch deck, and that no one above me would stop him until it was too late, because the people above me didn't care about clause this or subsection that. They cared about Chase's hair gel and his confidence, about his energy, about how he could own a room. Forget that the room he owned came with a $4.7 million data liability if mishandled. So I watched, logged things, documented the small infractions, like when he asked the sales team to fabricate demo stats, or when he handed a contractor temporary root access just to save time. I didn't escalate, not yet, because none of it triggered a legal threshold. And I knew the minute I went to compliance early, they'd just thank me for my due diligence and forget about it by lunch. But things changed fast when the Vancorp global opportunity landed. Vancorp wasn't just another logo to toss on a deck. They were Fortune 100, government adjacent, heavy contracts, strict governance. Landing them would mean 9-figure revenue and a press release with champagne. Everyone at Titanova started walking straighter, talking softer. Even Chase wore a blazer with actual sleeves. The stakes weren't just high, they were visible. Everyone wanted to be in that room. Everyone except me. I wanted to be anywhere else, because I knew what Chase was planning even before he opened his smug little mouth in the strategy meeting. "Let's give him the real thing," he said. "Live customer data, full dashboard access, authenticity cells." The room clapped, like he'd just reinvented the wheel. I stared at him like he'd farted on the flag. I reminded him calmly that using production data in a non-essential demo was a direct violation of our chain of custody clause. Section 7.3.1. Triggerable offense. He laughed, patted my shoulder, and said, "Brenda, nobody reads those clauses. Just sign the damn form." And that was the first time I felt it. Not just irritation, not even rage, but a quiet, buzzing clarity. The kind you get right before a storm or an audit. Because I remembered something Chase didn't know, something no one ever remembers. There's a little checkbox on the bottom of those access request forms. It doesn't say much. Just trigger CCO review for chain of custody override. Most people never tick it. Most people never see it. But I did. It didn't take long for Chase's buzzwords to become gospel. Velocity, vision, customer delight. He tossed them around like confetti at a leadership offsite, only with none of the cleanup. Within a month, plastered the walls of our shared workspace with slogans like "ship fast" or "die trying" and "perfect is the enemy of the close." I watched in real time as grown adults, some with Ivy League MBAs, started parroting this nonsense like it came from scripture. Procedures became punchlines. Guardrails were legacy thinking. The people in legal stopped showing up to planning meetings because they knew whatever they said would be ignored. My inbox, a horror show. Approvals were skipped. Sign-offs were forged. And somewhere in the background, Chase floated from room to room with his bespoke espresso and his podcast voice, talking about how we had to disrupt the enterprise compliance model, whatever the hell that meant. I stopped bothering to point out the violations every time. It was like throwing pebbles at a train. No one cared. Not the CTO, who just wanted to land Vancorp and cash out. Not the sales lead, who saw every risk warning as blocking revenue. And definitely not Chase, who treated rules like they were optional side quests in his video game of corporate domination. But what made it worse wasn't just that he broke things. It was how casually he did it. In one strategy session, 10 of us jammed into a glass conference room, sweating through another brainstorm where nothing got written down. He rolled his eyes so hard at me I thought he might sprain something. I just brought up for the third time that month that any access to user production data must be approved under chain of custody protocols. We have a fiduciary obligation, I said, to log every touch point, or else we trigger breach liability under Brenda. He interrupted, smiling like a dentist who just discovered you haven't flossed in years. We're here to win clients, not write manuals. He actually looked proud of himself. Like that line should go on a t-shirt. The junior devs chuckled, marketing nodded. Someone even said that's true, like we were all in on the joke now. I just blinked and sat back. That line told me everything I needed to know. We weren't building software anymore. We were building theater. From that moment, I started cataloging things differently. Less like a compliance officer and more like an archivist watching the fall of Rome. Not just the violations themselves, but the culture rot. Someone forged a timestamp? Noted. Chase gave temporary credentials to a contractor on Slack? Logged. DevOps bypassed the audit queue to spin up a sandbox with real client metrics. I documented the shell commands. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. Because I've learned something over the years. In places like Titanova, the louder you get, the easier you are to fire. But paper trails, those whisper in a tone legal can't ignore. And someday I knew. All those whispers were going to scream. One morning I got looped into a dashboard approval chain for a new demo environment. One of Chase's pet projects, naturally. And there it was, plain as day, a request to populate the demo with anonymized but live customer data, using identifiers stripped just enough to trick the eye, but not enough to fool an auditor. The notes even said, needs to impress Vancorp execs, must look real. No documentation, no legal review, just vibes. I pinged the engineering lead, asked if anyone had filled out a chain of custody override. He responded with a shrug emoji. A shrug emoji, that's where we were. But here's the thing, I wasn't panicking. I wasn't even mad. Because deep down, I knew the exact moment this would all come crashing down. It would happen live in front of a client when the stakes were highest. Chase was building his tower out of matchsticks, and I was just waiting for the breeze. I started spending more time inside our internal alert system, the one that tracks data access across privileged layers. Most people don't even know we have it, but I helped design it 5 years ago and I know where to find the heartbeat of every violation. It's not flashy, no dashboard, no pie charts, just a black screen, white logs, and a quiet pulse of who touched what, when, and whether they had permission. I checked it every day now, like a doctor checking vitals on a comatose patient. Then came the meeting that sealed it. Listen, Chase said, pacing in front of a digital whiteboard like he was on Shark Tank, this demo needs to sing. Vancorp's legal team doesn't care about our process. What they want is confidence. Show them real dashboards, real customers. Make it look like we've already won. He said it in front of the CTO, the head of sales, the marketing director, and 3 junior engineers who nodded like bobbleheads. And no one, not one person, stopped him. I glanced around the room. Not a single laptop open to the policy documents. No one even pretending to check. I thought of saying something. Then I remembered the last time I did. We're here to win clients, not write manuals, so I said nothing. I just logged in, opened the access request queue, and waited. Because eventually, someone would push the wrong button. And when they did, the system would light up. The Vancorp news dropped like a bomb on a Monday morning. Subject line in all caps, no punctuation. Vancorp Global Demo confirmed this Friday. There was no context, no prep, just a time slot and a demand. And yet every Slack thread exploded like someone had just dropped free Tesla stock. Calendars were cleared, designers were summoned, engineers, who hadn't worn clean shirts in 3 months, suddenly cared about cologne. Vancorp wasn't just another client, they were the kind of company that got your CFO invited to golf tournaments with senators. Naturally, Chase took full control of the experience. This is it, people, he declared at the War Room kickoff, which, yes, he actually called a war room. This is where we prove we're not just another B2B snoozefist. He'd booked a dedicated demo instance, scheduled a walkthrough of every dashboard, and assigned roles like we were casting a Broadway show. His big pitch? Real customer data, not dummy stats, not mocked-up graphs, live metrics from the production environment. Authenticity sells, he said, grinning like he'd trademarked it. I sat 2 seats away, staring down at my laptop, pretending to take notes but mostly just tracking my blood pressure. Chase, I said calmly, for what felt like the 8th time that month. Policy 12.4, C, explicitly prohibits the use of production data in external presentations unless reviewed and approved under the chain of custody clause. We don't even have client-side clearance. He smirked, like I was a kindergartner warning the class not to run with scissors. Brenda, I get it, he said, pacing like a guy doing a text talk for his dog. You're the rules person. That's important. But we're not shipping rocket parts here. This is a demo. If we win Vancorp, that's a 3-year deal and double our valuation. You want to block that over a clause no one reads? No one in the room said a word. Legal wasn't there, he hadn't invited them. Engineering looked at their shoes. Sales nodded nervously. Even the CFO gave a little shrug like, well, he's not wrong. I was alone. That's when he pulled out the form. It was a printed access request, one of our internal templates, already filled out. My name at the bottom with a sticky note, please sign ASAP, you're the compliance officer of record. I took it, read it line by line. Chase stood in front of me with his arms crossed, all posture and aftershave. We're good, right? You know how these things go. We fudge a little for the pitch, then clean it up later. Happens all the time. I looked up. That's exactly the problem. It's not supposed to happen all the time. But he was already turning away, handing out talking points, assigning slide decks like nothing mattered. I sat there holding that form like it was a live grenade. Every part of me screamed not to sign it. But what was my play? Say no and get steamrolled? Escalated and be labeled not a team player days before the biggest deal of the quarter? It would be my signature or someone else's. And whoever signed it, the data was getting used. I walked back to my cube in silence. I kept the form face down for an hour. Didn't even look at it. Just stared at my keyboard, chewing the inside of my cheek until it bled. And then, because sometimes the universe gets weird, I noticed something. A detail I'd forgotten. At the very bottom of the access form, buried in 8-point font, was a single checkbox. Trigger CCO review for chain of custody overrides. No one ever checked it. Hell, most people didn't even know it existed. But I did. I helped implement it after the 2017 breach, back when we still thought guardrails mattered. If that box was checked, it sent an automated ping, quiet, silent, to the chief compliance officer's secure inbox. No flags, no alarms, just a real-time alert that a potentially illegal data access had been authorized. It didn't stop the action, but it lit the fuse. I hovered over the box with my pen for what felt like forever. I could feel the weight of it. Choice? I wasn't blowing a whistle, I was just lighting a candle in a pitch-black hallway, hoping someone at the other end would see it before we all tripped over Chase's ego and fell into $1 million hole. I initialed the access line. Then I checked the box. Then I slid the form into the outgoing queue without a word, closed my laptop, and walked to the break room like it was any other Tuesday. But my pulse, it wasn't normal. My skin felt like static. My mouth was dry because now it was set. The system would send the alert within the hour. The CCO wouldn't say anything, not right away, but the countdown had begun. And if Chase thought he was the smartest man in the building, he was about to meet someone smarter. Someone who actually did read the clause. The form sat on my desk like a trap I'd baited myself. Pre-filled, official, perfectly formatted in Chase's assistant's handwriting, right down to the extra space before the date line. I stared at it so long the black ink started to shimmer like gasoline under fluorescent lights. It wasn't just paper anymore, it was a line in the sand. On one side, compliance theater, cowardice dressed as cooperation. On the other, a chance, however quiet, to remind this company that someone was still watching. My cube was too cold, too quiet. That corner of the office was always like that, tucked between the server room and the forgotten printer no one bothered to refill. It gave me a view of the hallway but no audience, which was fine by me. I didn't need witnesses for this, just clarity. You ever sign something with your hand shaking but your face calm? That's what it felt like. Calm on the outside, storm behind the eyes. The kind of storm that comes after years of men like Chase, men who act like their confidence is competence, like their charisma should override consequences. I'd spent a decade cleaning up after them, blocking their shortcuts, rebuilding the guardrails they tore down to look innovative. And for what? So they could stand in front of clients and talk about transparency while quietly nudging devs to falsify uptime metrics? So they could dump risk onto the same back-end systems I spent years bulletproofing, then claim the glory when the house didn't fall? Nah, not this time. I picked up my pen. Not the fancy Titan overbranded one they gave us at last year's town hall. I'd thrown that one away when they cut the ethics training budget. Just my cheap black Pilot G2. I held it for a moment, let it hover above the line next to my name. And then, steady as I've ever been, I signed. The form was no longer blank. Then I leaned forward, pressed the tip of the pen against that tiny, barely visible checkbox, the one that looked like it wasn't even meant to be used. Trigger CCO review for chain of custody overrides. I clicked it. You'd never know anything had changed. The ink didn't scream. The paper didn't catch fire. The system didn't light up like a slot machine. But somewhere deep in the compliance servers, buried inside a secure monitoring queue built 3 CTOs ago, an alert was quietly filed, timestamped, logged, delivered to a single inbox that required biometric verification to access. It was the digital equivalent of whispering into a microphone no one remembered was on. I sealed the form in the outgoing slot, let the machine eat it, and I sat there for a moment, breathing in that strange, thin air you only feel after you've stepped off the moral ledge. No regrets, just gravity. I thought about Chase, probably practicing his vision statement in front of a mirror, not knowing his entire song and dance was already smudged with red flags. I thought about the interns who'd been dragged into demo prep, forced to work 14-hour days because Chase wanted energy. I thought about the last junior dev who'd raised a concern in sprint planning, who now sat 3 rows away, quiet as a ghost after being told to let the leaders lead. And I thought about me. How many times I'd bitten my tongue, smoothed things over, protected the brand, protected the men who broke things and called it strategy, protected the board's image, the founder's ego, the investor's appetite for shiny dashboards, all while telling myself that keeping the system intact was more important than making noise. But today I didn't care if the noise got loud, because that box I checked, it didn't ask for my opinion. It didn't ask for permission. It asked one question: do you believe this is worth escalation? And for the first time in a long time, I did. I believed it mattered that Chase was using customer data like party confetti, that he was treating legal exposure like a rounding error, that he thought I was just another cog in the machine he could override with a smile and a pre-filled form. They never read the logs, I murmured to no one, but someone does. And with that, I turned back to my screen, opened the system health panel, and waited. The room smelled like confidence. Expensive cologne, freshly brewed coffee. That synthetic citrus cleaner they use to make you forget this is all just carpet tiles and leased furniture. Chase stood at the head of the long walnut conference table, gesturing like he was unveiling the goddamn cure for cancer. The giant flat screen behind him pulsed with real-time dashboards, live customer metrics projected in high-gloss clarity. KPI, active usage heat maps, API throughput, none of it scrubbed. All of it real. And that, gentlemen, is how Titanova delivers value at scale, live in the wild, no smoke, no mirrors. He smiled wide, teeth gleaming like he practiced his expressions in his rearview mirror every morning. The Vancorp execs nodded. One even chuckled. Sales hovered behind them like hawks in designer loafers, watching every reaction with bated breath. You could feel the numbers being calculated in their heads, commissions, bonuses, maybe even job titles. I stood by the back wall, half-shadowed by a fake fiddle leaf fig, the only woman in the room not pretending to be impressed. They told me I was welcome to observe, like I was some intern lucky enough to be near the action. Nobody asked me to speak. Nobody asked if the data being shared was sanctioned. Nobody cared that the live production metrics being paraded around like showroom models were a violation of multiple privacy protocols. I wasn't here to speak, I was here to watch. And watching, I'm very, very good at that. Chase strutted through the demo like he was on Shark Tank, pitching to billionaires who didn't know he'd already mortgaged the house to stage the performance. Every slide was a showpiece, every metric a magic trick. Real retention numbers, real user behavior, real risk. The Vancorp team soaked it up like gospel. They asked questions that made it clear they thought we were further along than we were. Chase answered with vague brilliance. We've seen a 30% lift in verified conversion across high volume and points. What he didn't mention was that the stat came from a data set involving real client activity accessed without authorization. But no one cared. Why would they? Fraud doesn't look like fraud when it wears a tailored blazer and speaks in buzzwords. I could see it in their eyes. This deal was going to close, they believed him. Chase was hitting every psychological sweet spot: confidence, data, vision. Meanwhile, the quiet compliance lead in the back me might as well have been invisible. They thought I was here to take notes, document the greatness, be a fly on the wall. If they only knew what I'd already done. My eyes drifted to the digital clock mounted above the whiteboard. We were 37 minutes into the meeting, long enough for the alert system to process the form, long enough for the CCO's system queue to flag an active violation. Any minute now. I sipped from my thermos, careful not to smile. I thought about the lengths we'd gone to build protections, fail-safes that only mattered when someone cared to trigger them. Most people never noticed the fire extinguisher until the curtains were already ablaze. But I did, and now, standing quietly beneath the ambient hum of air conditioning and soft jazz hold music playing on someone's forgotten phone, I realized something else. This was the problem. This exact moment. A room full of men nodding at a fraud dressed up like innovation. Chase tossing around customer data like it was a prop in a marketing stunt. Clients dazzled by metrics they weren't supposed to see. Salespeople ready to pop champagne without once asking how the magic trick was pulled. Me silent again, always the silence. But not this time, not entirely. Because while I might have been invisible to the room, the system had seen me. The log had my initials. The alert had been sent. The countdown had started. I glanced once more at Chase, who was now walking through a future state roadmap he cooked up over a weekend in his apartment, probably while listening to a hustle podcast at 1.5x speed. And with Vancorp's partnership, he was saying we can scale this framework globally by Q4. He had no idea. He was selling a house whose foundation was already gone. I adjusted my posture, folded my arms, and waited for the door to open. My screen dimmed for a second, then blinked back to life. A soft flicker in the corner, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. But I was looking. I'd been watching the logging console through a narrow gap between the projection screen and a fake monster plant some interior designer probably thought would make this glass fishbowl feel collaborative. And there it was. Alert received CCO review initiated form ID 4621CHK 1042, 16 a.m. right on schedule. I felt it before I thought it, one sharp thump in my chest, like my heart had jumped just to make sure I was paying attention. Then silence again, not fear, not guilt, just a stillness I hadn't known I'd missed. I leaned back just enough to steady my breath and took a slow sip of coffee from my thermos. It was lukewarm now, burnt, metallic, but I didn't care. I needed something to do with my hands, and pretending to drink helped me look like I belonged in the background. Invisible, harmless. Chase hadn't noticed a thing. He was still in full peacock mode, pacing back and forth in front of the Vancorp execs, showing off high-res graphs like they were his baby pictures. He was on the second-to-last slide now, something about real-time behavioral insights pulled from our top-tier users. I recognized the layout. I'd signed the approval for it yesterday, but not for this. Not with that data, not like this. If you listened closely, you could hear the C-level dreams starting to materialize around him. The clients were asking about integration timelines. Sales had started passing notes, probably coordinating next steps, commission breakdowns. Even the CFO had crept in through the back door during the last 15 minutes, like a raccoon sniffing around a gold mine. And in the middle of it all, Chase, clueless, proud, strutting toward a cliff with a Rolex and a bulletproof smile, didn't know the review protocol had already triggered. He didn't know the CCO's office had received the alert in real time, routed automatically through a secure channel that bypassed all departmental silos. He didn't know that once the system marked a form as override with live production data, it kicked off a chain of procedures we'd never once used, because no one had ever been reckless enough to warrant it. Until now, that box I'd checked wasn't just a warning. It was a red light with teeth. And if the policy still meant anything at all, someone was already moving, reading, verifying, escalating. I didn't know when they'd act. I didn't know how they'd act. But they would. It was like holding your breath during a lightning storm, counting the seconds between the flash and the thunder. The flash had already happened. We were just waiting for the sound. No one else in the room could feel the static, but I could. It buzzed along my spine like a low-voltage current. I'd spent years building systems to catch problems before they became lawsuits. This wasn't theory, this was practice. I'd done my part, quietly, precisely, with no need to grandstand. Now it was out of my hands. I reached into my blazer pocket and felt the familiar curve of the flash drive I always kept on me. Red casing. Labeled Beat Chase logs in tiny black print, just in case. I didn't need it today, but something about having it there made the tension in my shoulders drop a degree. Across the room, Chase was laughing. He had a Vancorp guy doubled over about some startup horror story, probably fictional, about hiring developers off Craigslist and waking up to $1 million data breach. Everyone laughed like that could never happen to us. Except it was already happening, just slower, quieter, more surgical. I shifted my weight, let my eyes scan the room, noticed how no one was watching the door. But I was. I was watching it like it might grow teeth, like I already knew what was coming, and I didn't need to speak, I just needed to wait. It happened in a second so sharp it sliced through the air like a scalpel. The boardroom door, never touched during meetings, always locked during demos, clicked open. Not a knock, not a polite announcement, just the quiet authority of a man who didn't need permission to enter a room he already owned. Mr. Halloran, Chief Compliance Officer, 40 years in risk governance. The kind of man who made you sit up straighter just by walking past your cubicle, never raised his voice, never carried a laptop, never once used the phrase circle back. His presence alone felt like a legal clause brought to life. And now he was here, in this room, during this meeting. And Chase didn't even notice at first. He was mid-sentence, some anecdote about reinventing the user funnel, gesturing wildly at a slide with 3 buzzwords stacked like a hostage note. Insight, impact, integrity. The irony nearly made me laugh. Mr. Halloran walked in slow, deliberate steps, the way predators do when they've already caught the scent. He wasn't flanked by assistants, no laptop, just a manila folder and a clipboard in his hand, tucked under his arm like a verdict. Chase finally noticed him when the motion crossed into his eyeline. "Oh, hey, Halloran, you're just in time to see that Mr. Halloran didn't speak, didn't even blink." He walked straight past the rows of suits, past the demo screen, past the Vancorp delegation with their confused, polite half-smiles. He walked directly to Chase, calm as gravity, and held out the clipboard. Chase stopped mid-pitch. The words died in his throat. Everyone else stopped too. You could feel it happen, the shift, when confidence collapses under the weight of something real. Every shoulder straightened, every breath caught. Even the guy from Vancorp who'd been grinning since the coffee arrived suddenly looked like someone had pulled the fire alarm inside his brain. No one said a word. Chase took the clipboard slowly, like it might explode. He looked down. His smile twitched, hesitated, then tried to return. He was still in performance mode, still thinking this was just a routine sign-off or some optics exercise, but I knew that form. I'd seen it twice in my career, once during an internal fraud case, once when a regional VP accessed private financial disclosures from a partner firm and tried to leak them anonymously to drive down acquisition costs. Internal suspension notice, Class A, the kind you don't recover from. Chase's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes flicked to Mr. Halloran, who stood there like a monument, patient, silent, unmoving. A human firewall, and that silence, that was the moment the room cracked open. Because suddenly everyone remembered I was in the room, not just Brenda the note-taker, not just Brenda the quiet compliance lady. Brenda, the woman who signed the form. I could feel eyes shifting toward me sideways, subtle. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched Chase read through the lines he probably thought didn't apply to people like him. Clause 12.4c, chain of custody violation. Immediate review by Chief Compliance Officer. Privilege suspension pending legal assessment. Is this a, Chase started to say, but his voice caught, bone dry. Mr. Halloran still hadn't spoken. He simply took a single step back, and the door behind him opened again. This time it wasn't gentle, it was legal. 3 of them, quiet suits, badges clipped to their belts, eyes like cold steel. They didn't walk fast, didn't need to, just entered the room and stood still. That was enough. Sales froze. The CFO took a half step toward the exit, then stopped like he'd remembered where he was. The Vancorp exec sat stock still, hands folded, expressions perfectly neutral, the kind that only come from years of watching very expensive things fall apart in real time. I watched Chase grip the sides of the clipboard, watched him read the line where his system credentials were to be disabled within 15 minutes, watched his fingers twitch. Brenda, he said, barely above a whisper, did you? I didn't answer, didn't need to. I looked at Mr. Halloran instead. He gave the smallest nod, like a check mark drawn in the air. And I knew then the clause worked. The fuse I'd lit wasn't just symbolic, it burned. Sir, Mr. Halloran said at last, voice smooth as cold granite, your credentials are revoked. Access terminated pending legal review. 7 words, no drama, no volume, just finality wrapped in policy and delivered like a scalpel sliding between ribs. Chase blinked like he hadn't heard right, then blinked again, slower. His brain was stuttering. You could see the performance machinery jam. The practiced grin faltered. His brows twitched, mouth open, waiting for a line that never came. He let out a breathy half-laugh, trying to recover, to play it off like a joke had just landed poorly. Okay, well, I'm sure we can clear this up, he said, the words falling out like pennies from a broken vending machine. Must be some kind of what, automated thing? I mean, I'm literally in the middle of the, he gestured at the big screen, like the dashboards could somehow vouch for his character. But no one responded. The Vancorp execs had gone silent, their expressions frozen at neutral professional, that corporate reflex when a deal implodes mid-sentence and nobody wants their reaction documented in the minutes. One of them reached for his pen. Another checked his watch. Their body language was louder than any speech. This is no longer our meeting. Excuse us, said the lead Vancorp rep, voice soft but firm. We'll give you a moment. They stood up in near unison, gathering notepads, tablets, dignity. Not in anger, in withdrawal. Like they'd just realized they'd stepped in something they couldn't afford to get on their shoes. Chase moved to speak, to intercept, maybe to beg, but Mr. Halloran simply extended one hand, palm out like a crossing guard. Not aggressive, just final. The clients left without looking back. And Chase, he was still standing there with the clipboard in his hands like a kid holding a failed science fair project. His voice dropped, low and hoarse. It's just for me. Brenda, what the hell is going on? I didn't answer. I didn't even shift my weight. I just kept my eyes on the middle distance, watching the screen fade back to the login page, the session timed out automatically by the system's kill switch, another protocol I'd helped design. Then, like punctuation, legal entered. 2 men, 1 woman, not the whole department, just the ones who mattered. The ones who filed the right reports, spoke the right language, and knew exactly how to squirt a liability out of a building without making a scene. They didn't look angry. They didn't look satisfied. They looked like weather, like inevitability. They didn't need to be introduced. Everyone in the room already understood who they were and why they were here. Chase took 1 step backward. His body betrayed him, shoulders tightening, chest rising fast. Wait, hold on, this is just compliance being paranoid again, right? I mean, Jesus, I've seen everyone pull live data for demo before. We're not exactly revealing nuclear codes here. No one laughed. Mr. Halloran didn't even blink. The taller of the legal reps stepped forward and extended a small folder. Mr. Halpern, your company access, including accounts, devices, and digital credentials, has been suspended, effective immediately. Please remain here until we've retrieved your badge. Suspended? Chase hissed, looking around like someone would object. For what? For winning a client? Nobody responded. There was nothing left to say. In the corner, the CTO, who'd magically appeared the moment things looked lucrative, now stared very hard at a decorative wall map of the Titanova global footprint. The head of sales had already slipped out the side door. The CFO was fidgeting with his phone like it owed him an explanation. I watched Chase's eyes flick to each of them. One by one, they turned away. And in that moment, I felt something I didn't expect. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just stillness. It wasn't pleasure, it wasn't revenge. It was justice doing what it's supposed to do, quietly, without applause. A system correcting itself, not because someone fought loud, but because someone followed the rules when no one else would. Chase stood there for a long time, clipboard in one hand, the other hanging limp like even his fingers didn't know what to do now. And I didn't move, didn't blink. Just watched the collapse like I'd watched the build-up, quietly, precisely, without fanfare. Because this wasn't about vindication. This was about the claws, and the claws had spoken. They took him out the back hallway. No cuffs, no yelling. Just two legal reps and Mr. Halloran, flanking him like shadows. As Chase walked stiffly down the corridor with his badge clipped to the inside of a manila folder, and his face locked in the expression of a man trying to remember the last moment he was sure everything was fine. His footsteps sounded too loud on the laminate floor, echoing in the way humiliation does when the performance ends and the audience forgets they ever applauded. No one made eye contact. People peeled off to their monitors, pretended to be deep in emails. Sales vanished. Engineering became suddenly fascinated with JIRA tickets they'd ignored all week. Even the office manager didn't look up when they passed her desk. I watched them go from the break room window, sipping what remained of my third coffee, room temp now, almost sweet from the artificial creamer. By the time I got back to my desk, the system had already logged Chase's status as inactive legal hold. His Slack presence was gone. Email suspended. Internal wiki access revoked. Just like that, the digital residue of him began to vanish, line by line. And then came the memo. It arrived like clockwork, subject line, company-wide reminder. Compliance is everyone's responsibility. No mention of Chase. No details. Just a few paragraphs from the CEO about renewed commitment to regulatory excellence and strict adherence to all data governance protocols. Signed off with a quote about integrity being what you do when no one is watching. Which was rich, considering they'd only started watching once I flipped the switch. The irony didn't sting anymore. It just felt expected. What I didn't expect was the ping from legal later that afternoon. Brenda, can you come down to conference room D? We'd like a quick debrief on how the CCO alert was triggered so quickly. Not well done, not thank you. Just a request for the mechanics. They didn't want the story. They wanted the blueprint. How the system caught what people didn't. I went. I answered their questions. Explained the trigger logic, the flagging automation, the silent escalation flow I'd helped install back in the early days when the founders still believed in risk management. Halloran sat across from me, silent, nodding occasionally, but mostly just watching, like he was recalibrating a model in his head. Not about me, about the company, about what happens when the quiet ones stop being quiet. I didn't stay long, didn't need to. The pieces were already in motion now. Policy updates, training refreshers, a new pre-demo checklist that included mandatory legal sign-off. None of it because they suddenly cared, but because Chase had reminded them what not caring cost. By 6:15 p.m., the office was nearly empty. Most people had scattered early, as if embarrassment was contagious. I stayed, cleaned up a few loose access approvals, closed out the dashboard logs, deleted a draft of a resignation letter I didn't think I'd ever send but had kept saved just in case. And then on my way out, I passed his office. Chase's glass-walled shrine to ego, once stuffed with framed motivational quotes and expensive gadgets, was half empty now. A cardboard box sat on the desk, half filled with mismatched chargers, branded thermos, and a single wrinkled blazer on a plastic hanger. His nameplate had already been removed. The screen behind the desk glowed with the company login prompt, like it was already inviting someone else to sit there and pretend to be in charge. I paused at the doorway, took one long look, and then, just for a second, I smiled. Not because I hated him, not because I wanted payback, but because someone finally read the clause. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit him.